May 1940. London is dark, blacked out against the looming threat of German bombs. Inside a quiet flat sits a 52-year-old man. He is paralyzed on one side from a recent stroke, living in exile. His trembling hands hold a copy of the morning paper. The man is Marcus Garvey, and the article he is staring at is an obituary, his own. This is the front page of the Jamaican Daily Gleaner from May 18th. The text declares plainly that Garvey has died. But he was very much alive. A rival intentionally leaked a fabricated story, hoping to bury his reputation while he was still breathing. The shock of reading his own demise and the flood of grieving letters that immediately poured into his office took a severe physical toll. The intense stress triggered a second, massive stroke. 2 weeks later, the obituary became reality. Garvey was quietly placed into a musty catacomb beneath a London chapel, seemingly erased from the world stage. It is a quiet, lonely end, which makes it completely at odds with his life. Just a few years earlier, this same man commanded a global empire of over 11 million devoted followers. How did he end up dying in total obscurity? To understand the tragedy of his final days, we have to look at the peak of his influence. In the 1920s, Garvey drew massive, highly organized crowds through the streets of Harlem and across the United States. He had traveled a long way from his childhood in the coastal town of St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica. Growing up under British rule, he was surrounded by a colonial system that explicitly categorized Africans as a lesser race. Garvey wholly rejected that premise. He argued that Black people worldwide needed to rely entirely on their own intellect and resources. He taught his followers a very simple, demanding mantra. In this world, we are exactly what we make ourselves. He required a complete mental break from the established order. This psychological independence served as the mandatory first step toward building a self-reliant civilization. Garvey turned his philosophy into a concrete blueprint. He actively constructed a virtual government for marginalized people scattered across the globe. He founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, launched a global shipping company called the Black Star Line, and created a highly structured hierarchy of titled citizens, complete with their own auxiliary groups and youth corps. When he returned to Jamaica, he applied this exact institution building locally. In 1929, he launched a political party with a 14-plank platform that laid the direct, practical groundwork for the island's eventual self-government. By creating viable economic and political structures, Garvey proved that complete independence was a highly practical, achievable goal. That practical reality terrified the established powers. European imperial governments viewed his massive institution building as an existential threat to their colonial control. Back home, he faced relentless opposition from Jamaica's ruling class, a local elite deeply invested in preserving the colonial hierarchy of skin color and class. They actively worked to undermine his unifying message. The combined weight of this constant hounding and political fracturing finally took its toll. Exhausted and facing a collapsing organization, Garvey sought a measure of peace, going into voluntary exile in London in 1935. He was making a final retreat. His ideas were simply too dangerous for the established colonial order to tolerate in its own backyard. Which brings us back to the dark catacombs of London in 1940. His physical movement appeared dead, yet the anti-colonial uprisings he had predicted for decades were actively erupting around the world. The British could exile the man, but they couldn't contain his most potent weapon, his call to emancipate the population from mental slavery. This animated map illustrates how his teachings formed an ideological bedrock that spread outward, directly influencing anti-colonial revolutions across the Caribbean, Africa, and America over the next 2 decades. His exact words survived, passed down to a new generation of cultural icons. His spirit and teachings became central to the music of artists like Bob Marley, who sang his philosophies to a global audience. By October 1964, the seeds he planted had fully matured. Jamaica had successfully negotiated its independence. In recognition of his foundational work, the newly formed Jamaican government issued a formal request to exhume his body from those dusty London catacombs. Marcus Garvey was flown back across the Atlantic. Upon arriving in his homeland, he was met not with silence, but with the massive, roaring honors of a state funeral. The man who died of a broken heart in a lonely exile was brought back as Jamaica's first national hero. A political rival managed to print his obituary early, but the history he set in motion proved impossible to bury.